All right, welcome to the second video in chapter 4. Although this is the second video, this is really the beginning of the chapter here. So what we're going to talk about in this section is we're going to talk about the strategy of industrial growth. Now, one of the important things is you often wonder, why is India in such a dire strait, or why is the condition in India so much worse off than in other countries? Well, part and parcel, that has to be blamed to the British. The British were actually the ones who manipulated the Indians and took advantage of their resources and land and left their condition in absolute tatters. So with that said, we're going to take a look at a couple of reasons why we need to advance our industrial sector as much as possible and why that's important for us. So the very first thing we need to look at is what's the importance of industry versus the government. So this section, in section 1, we're going to talk about the importance of industry itself. And then in the second part, or in the next video, we're going to talk about how government plays a role itself. So let's talk about the industry. So in industry, there are a number of important issues here. As you can see, there are 7 listed here. And first, we're going to talk about structural transformation, followed by a source of employment. Next, the source of mechanized farming, followed by Imparts dynamism to growth process. It's a little bit of a strange title, but it's important. Next, we have the growth of civilization. Then infrastructural growth, which is incredibly important. And then this last one, which looks a little bit strange, Sine-qua-non. It's actually an important concept that we will cover in great detail. Okay, so let's begin with structural transformation. So what do we have? In structural transformation, does industry bring about structural transformation? Well, it absolutely does. Industry brings about transformation that would otherwise not be possible. Think about the agricultural sector. In the agricultural sector, we have wage goods. We have foods which are used to survive. We produce foods which are used to survive, or we produce raw materials for other sorts of inputs that end up going into food production and food consumption. So industry allows us the ability to produce goods that are not just for consumption in the sense that we're not eating them, right? We have cars and air conditioners and refrigerators and sofas and all these different products which actually signal a significant shift in the way we live our lives. So agricultural products themselves allow us to survive, but industry allows us to change the way in which we live. Now, industry is also important as a source of employment. Now, what kind of jobs does this provide? Well, it's not so much the kinds of jobs, but the fact that it provides jobs for those in India who are unable to work in the agricultural sector because there are no jobs available, as there are too many people. This is a very critical problem in our country that we need to address. We have far too much population growth, and we don't have enough opportunities in agriculture for everybody. So industry actually fits in a nice way and provides lots of jobs to people that otherwise would be unemployed. Next, let's take a look at the source of mechanized farming. Well, one of the things that industry does is it allows us to create machinery, and that machinery can then be used on farmlands to increase output. And that increased output will allow us to take advantage of our lands and soils in a way that we've never done before. And actually, this is a very critical aspect of industry, the ability for us to increase our yields in agriculture. The next issue, imparting dynamism to the growth process, means basically, very simply, industrialization has changed the way we live our lives. And what does that mean? Well, in the past, we needed to go and find goods that we could consume in order to be able to survive. But now, we are now consumers living in a consumer market, and we have demands for goods like televisions, cell phones, whatever else there may be out there. And those desires for commercial goods change the way in which we live our lives. And that means it has changed society in a very dynamic way. The types of goods we desire, the type of products are always changing. And that is part and parcel about what we are talking about, dynamism. Next, let's look at the growth of civilization. Well, how does this change the way we live in terms of civilization? Well, in the past, we couldn't live far away from the lands where we cultivated our produce because we wanted fresh foods or we needed access to fresh water. But now, Because of industrialization, we're able to live in urban centers, and urbanization is absolutely possible because of refrigeration and because of processes which allow us to make our goods have a longer shelf life. And there are many things that industrialization allows us to achieve, but one of them is clearly urbanization. And urbanization has absolutely changed the way we behave as a civilized society. Next, as I mentioned in the beginning, infrastructural growth is very important. There are two different types of infrastructural growth that we will talk about probably more than once. The first type is economic growth. The second type is social. Now, economic infrastructure refers to infrastructure which can actually be financially evaluated and determined to have a significant impact on GDP. So, for example, we're able to assess how much GDP has changed as a result of investments in economic infrastructure. Social infrastructure, on the other hand, its impacts on GDP might oftentimes not be clear, but they're no less important. Social infrastructure includes education, healthcare, and care for the aging. Now, all of these are important, but measuring their impact on GDP is not such a straightforward proposition. And finally, the last aspect here is sine-qua-non. Now, what is this? Very basically, sine-qua-non of growth just means that industrialization itself is a necessary sign or signal of growth. So in any society, when we see that the society is moving away from an agriculture society and moving more towards industrialization, we know that growth, or GDP growth more accurately, is happening.